What is gold and why is it valuable?
Well, gold has been accepted as money, more or less. It's been put into coins and accepted as backing for money for going back to ancient times. But what you need to bear in mind is that gold is intrinsically valuable because it is scarce. People chose gold because you just can't multiply it. You can't print it in the basement like the Weimar Republic did its paper currency. The Indians in North America, the Northeast Indians, use shell wampum. And the reason for that is that the shells that they could string were extraordinarily scarce. They were only found around the Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island and along the shores in certain places of the Long Island Sound. They were sort of some sort of fish inside the shell. But they were strung together with considerable effort. And so they were scarce. And the Indians came to accept those, much as, for example, in POW camps, cigarettes were accepted because they could not be multiplied. It's what people agree to. Now, in more modern times, people have technology and they can multiply almost anything. And gold has the value or the characteristic that it has purposes. You can use it for jewelry and things like this. And I suspect that's why we gravitated towards gold. It's also worked with some difficulty, but it can be worked. For example, it's worked really like all ferrous metals without heat. You know, you just pound it. So it had a lot of interesting characteristics that made that happen. But it's scarce. It has an underlying purpose. It can be used for jewelry. And so it's never really going to be without value.
Very good. Okay, so when did it really take off as the world's metric for value?
Well, it was always very valuable as soon as people had commerce, because you could exchange stuff for it. I mean, that's why Cortez and the other Spanish explorers came to America, to get gold. They weren't interested in opening a large jewelry store in Madrid. They were interested in something that could be swapped around and used to build the Armada, for example. You could use gold to buy what you needed. The Romans paid the army in gold. They weren't decorating their bodies with it. They were using it to live off of. So that's what they did. I mean, basically, one of the reasons the Romans were always sacking other civilizations was to pay off the army. And so the emperor could build his monuments, his colosseums, his forum, and so forth, by paying the construction workers with gold or paying the people that provided the supplies. He used slaves for his construction workers, but he had engineers.
Professor, can you help me understand what the gold standard is? Like, when did we peg our currency to gold, and why is that important? What did that look like?
After the Civil War, we were in what we call the golden age of the international economy. There weren't many barriers to trade. And until World War I, this persisted. And into the 1920s. Essentially, all the major economies of the world, the major governments, backed their currencies with gold. They kept gold in their equivalent of Fort Knox, which meant, for example, if we had a trade deficit, we imported more than we exported. So there was an accumulation of dollars abroad. They could trade those in for gold. But in turn, that would contract the U.S. money supply. And that would cause deflation here, which would lower our prices and cause our exports to increase, imports to decrease, and balance things out again. Now, two things caused that system to come apart. One was that it puts a lot of burdens on a deficit country to have to endure deflation. And more importantly, gold is scarce. I mean, a lot of the politics of the Williams-Jennings-Bryan era, the pre-modern Democratic Party, were fought over the gold standard, whether we should stick to the gold standard, because it had a deflationary effect. Because there's just only so much gold in the world. You can't mine it fast enough. After World War II, we tried to recreate it. The world backed up its currencies with dollars. The dollar was technically backed by gold, but you couldn't get gold for it. But it was technically backed up by gold. And we pegged all the exchange rates to the dollar. You know, the pound was worth so many dollars, the franc was worth so many dollars, and so forth. But they'd still get into those kinds of situations. Trade deficit countries wouldn't have enough dollars, they'd have to devalue their currency, or they'd have to basically deflate their economies. And one by one, we had currency crises in the 1950s and 60s, in the franc and the pound. And ultimately, the dollar became overvalued against everyone else. Jimmy Carter ended the system, more or less, and that was all for the better. And we emerged into our present system of floating exchange rates. Now, the world still backs its currency with dollars. Central banks hold dollars, but we let the currencies float so as to avoid these kinds of imbalances. Of course, there are countries like China that cheat on the system, and that's why there's so much controversy about their currency. They do things to keep it undervalued and basically accumulate dollars.
Wow, that was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like, subscribe, get more.